Stress exists in Islam not as a punishment, but as a language. It is one of the ways Allah speaks to the human heart when words alone would not reach it. If life were always calm, the soul would grow complacent, and the heart would forget where true safety lies. Stress interrupts the illusion of control. It shakes us awake from the belief that we are self-sufficient and reminds us that we were never meant to carry the weight of this world alone. The Quran never presents this life as a place of uninterrupted ease. Allah tells us clearly in Surah Al-Baqarah that we will be tested with fear, hunger, loss of wealth, loss of life, and loss of fruits. And then He gives glad tidings to those who remain patient. Stress is embedded within that divine statement. It is not accidental, it is purposeful. It is part of the design of a life meant to prepare us for something far greater than comfort. Stress exists because this world is not Jannah. If this life were free of anxiety, heartbreak, and pressure, we would cling to it too tightly. Stress loosens our grip. It reminds us that permanence does not live here. Every moment of heaviness whispers to the believer that there is a place where hearts will finally rest. Allah says in Surah Ar-Ra'd that it is in the remembrance of Allah that hearts find tranquility. Notice that He does not say life becomes tranquil, but hearts do. Stress may remain around you, but peace can still be rooted within you. Allah also teaches us that stress often precedes expansion. In Surah Ash-Sharh, He says that with hardship comes ease, and then He repeats it as if to carve it into our consciousness. The scholars point out that the wording indicates that one hardship is surrounded by multiple eases. Stress is not the full story, it is the tight space before the opening, the contraction before the relief. Many people want the ease without the pressure, but Allah's pattern is growth through difficulty. Consider the lives of the prophets, the most beloved to Allah, and you will find that stress was not removed from their paths. Adam experienced regret and loss. Nuh endured centuries of rejection. Ibrahim was thrown into a fire. Musa stood before a tyrant with fear in his chest. Maryam faced loneliness and accusations. While carrying her miracle, Yusuf was betrayed, enslaved, and imprisoned despite his innocence. If stress were a sign of Allah's anger, these lives would look very different. Instead, they teach us that stress can be a sign that Allah is shaping you for something sacred. In Surah Al-Ankabut, Allah asks a question that pierces the heart. Do people think they will be left to say we believe without being tested? Stress is often the proof that faith is alive. It forces belief out of theory and into action. When everything is easy, faith is assumed. When stress arrives, faith is revealed. Who do you turn to when you feel cornered? What do you cling to when the noise of life grows loud? Stress exposes the true anchors of the soul. There is also mercy hidden within stress. Sometimes Allah places pressure on the heart to prevent it from hardening. A heart that never breaks can become arrogant. A soul that never struggles can become distant. Stress softens us. It humbles us. It teaches empathy. It makes us more gentle with others because we know what it feels like to barely hold ourselves together. The Prophet's companions were shaped by trials, and through those trials they became lights for the world. Allah reminds us in Surah At-Talaq that whoever is mindful of Him, He will make a way out and provide from where they never expected. Stress narrows your vision until you feel trapped, but taqwa widens the horizon. You may not see the exit, but Allah has already placed it. You may not understand the delay, but Allah is arranging something beyond your imagination. Stress trains the believer to trust the unseen, to walk forward even when clarity is withheld. Even grief and sadness are acknowledged in the Quran. In Surah Yusuf, Yaqub grieves until his eyes turn white, yet Allah does not condemn his sorrow. Instead, Yaqub says that he only complains of his anguish to Allah. Stress is not the absence of faith. Turning away from Allah and stress is. Islam does not demand emotional numbness. It invites emotional honesty directed toward the one who can heal. Stress also exists to realign priorities. When life presses in, the unnecessary falls away. You begin to see what truly matters. Status fades. Validation loses its shine. The heart starts searching for meaning rather than applause. In Surah Ad-Duha, Allah reminds the Prophet of moments of vulnerability, of being in need, of feeling alone, and then gently assures him that he was never abandoned. That same reassurance extends to every believer who feels overwhelmed and unseen. Sometimes stress is the answer to a dua you forgot you made. You asked Allah for closeness, for sincerity, for strength, and Allah answered in a form that shapes you rather than spoils you. Strength is not built in comfort. Reliance is not learned in ease. Tawakkul is born when every other support collapses and you realize Allah has been holding you all along. Stress exists because Allah loves you enough not to leave you unchanged. It is a tool of transformation, a mirror for the heart, a bridge between who you are and who you are meant to become. When carried with remembrance, patience, and trust, stress becomes an act of worship. Every tear becomes recorded, every sleepless night becomes meaningful, every whispered dua becomes closer than your own breath. Stress also exists to strip away false dependencies. When everything around you is stable, it is easy to mistake the creation for the creator, the means for the source. You begin to rely on people, positions, plans, and predictions, but Allah in His wisdom sometimes allows those supports to shake so that your heart learns where true stability lies. In Surah Az-Zumar, Allah asks whether the one whose chest Allah has expanded to Islam, walking upon light from his Lord, is like one whose heart is hardened. Expansion often follows constriction. Light often follows pressure. Stress presses the heart until it becomes ready to receive something deeper. There are moments when stress feels suffocating, when the mind replays the same worries and the heart feels heavy without a clear reason. Allah speaks directly to those moments in Surah Al-Inshiqaq, reminding the human being that they are constantly striving toward their Lord step by step, breath by breath. Stress is part of that striving. It is the resistance that gives direction to your movement. Without it, you would drift. With it, you are being pushed forward even when it feels like you are barely surviving. Allah does not ignore the emotional weight carried by the believer. In Surah Al-Kahf, the story of the companions of the cave reveals young people overwhelmed by a society that threatened their faith. Their stress drove them to a cave, a place of apparent isolation, yet Allah turned that place into a sanctuary and preserved them beyond imagination. What looks like retreat can be protection. What feels like loss can be preservation. Stress often narrows your options until you are forced to choose Allah alone, and that choice opens doors you never knew existed. Stress also purifies intention. When actions are easy, motivations can become mixed. You may do good while still craving recognition. You may worship while still leaning on routine. But when stress enters, sincerity is tested. In Surah Al-Mulk, Allah reminds us that He created life and death to test who is best in deeds, not who does the most. Stress reveals why you do what you do. It burns away the extras and leaves only what is real. There are stresses that come from loss, and Allah addresses that pain with tenderness. In Surah Al-Hadid, He tells us that no calamity befalls except that it was written before it occurred, so that we do not grieve excessively over what escapes us nor become arrogant over what we gain. This is not a call to suppress emotion, but an invitation to balance the heart. Stress teaches you to hold blessings with gratitude, not entitlement, and to hold losses with trust, not despair. Sometimes stress lingers longer than expected, and the believer wonders why relief is delayed. Allah answers this impatience in Surah Al-Baqarah, reminding us that help comes when the messengers and believers cried out, wondering when Allah's help would arrive. And then Allah declares that His help is always near. Near does not always mean immediate, it means precise. It means perfectly timed. Stress stretches patience until it becomes a form of worship itself. Allah also uses stress to elevate ranks. The Prophet taught that no fatigue, illness, anxiety, sorrow, harm, or distress afflicts a believer except that Allah expiates sins through it. Stress is not wasted pain, it is currency in the unseen. Every moment of restraint, every breath taken instead of a breakdown, every choice to remain gentle when life feels harsh is being counted. In Surah An-Nisa, Allah promises immense reward for those who obey Him and His Messenger, and stress is often the environment in which obedience becomes most meaningful. There are stresses that come from responsibility, from carrying more than you think you can bear. Allah reassures the believer in Surah Al-Baqarah that He does not burden a soul beyond its capacity. This does not mean the burden will feel light. It means that within you is a strength you have not yet discovered. Stress pulls that strength to the surface. It reveals resilience you did not know you possessed and dua you did not know how to make. Stress also teaches dependence on prayer. When life is calm, prayer can become routine. When stress arrives, prayer becomes lifeline. In Surah Al-Anbiya, Allah describes the prophets as those who raced toward good deeds and called upon Him in hope and fear. Stress sharpens that balance. Hope keeps you moving forward. Fear keeps you humble. Together, they anchor the heart in sincerity. There are times when stress is the result of striving for what is wrong. Allah, in His mercy, allows discomfort to arise so that you reconsider your direction. In Surah Al-Qasas, Allah reminds us not to seek corruption on the earth. and that He does not love the core. Ruptures. Stress can be a sign that the soul is misaligned, chasing something that cannot bring peace. That discomfort is guidance, not punishment, if you are willing to listen. Stress also connects you to the global ummah. When you feel pain, you become more aware of the pain of others. You make dua with sincerity for those you never met. Your heart softens toward the oppressed, the grieving, the struggling. In Surah An-Ma'un, Allah warns against a faith that ignores human suffering. Stress pulls you out of self-centeredness and into compassion. Even moments of overwhelming fear are acknowledged. When Musa stood before the sea with Pharaoh behind him, stress reached its peak. Yet in Surah Ash-Shu'ara, Musa declares with certainty that his Lord is with him and will guide him. Stress placed him at the edge of the impossible so that Allah's power could be displayed without ambiguity. Some of the greatest openings in history came at moments of maximum pressure. Stress also refines patience into something active, not passive. Sabr in Islam is not silent suffering, it is perseverance with purpose. In Surah As-Surah, Allah ties success to faith, righteous action, truth, and patience. Stress gives patience a battlefield. It turns endurance into movement, into growth, into quiet heroism that no one sees but Allah records in full. At times, stress is simply a reminder of human limitation. You were not created to carry everything. Allah says in Surah Al-Insan that He created the human being weak. That weakness is not a flaw. It is an invitation to lean on divine strength. Stress exposes the limits of human effort so that divine assistance can take center stage. Through all of this, stress remains temporary, even when it feels endless. Allah reminds us repeatedly that the hereafter is better and more lasting. Stress loosens your attachment to what fades and strengthens your longing for what remains. It turns the heart toward a promise that cannot be shaken, a mercy that does not expire, and a Lord who sees every silent struggle, every unspoken fear, and every moment you chose trust over collapse. Stress also trains the believer to read life through the lens of the hereafter. When everything feels heavy, the soul begins to ask deeper questions about purpose, accountability, and return. Allah repeatedly redirects our gaze beyond the immediate moment. In Surah Al-A'la, He reminds us that this worldly life is temporary, while the hereafter is better and more enduring. Stress peels away distractions and forces the heart to confront what truly lasts. It turns the believer from short-term relief to long-term meaning. There are moments when stress feels unjust, when you have done your best and still find yourself struggling. Allah speaks to this feeling in Surah Al-Balad, describing the steep path that few choose to climb. That path is filled with difficulty, sacrifice, and resistance. Stress is often the sign that you are climbing, not falling. Ease is common. Growth is rare. Allah honors those who choose the harder ascent with awareness and intention. Stress also reshapes how you see success. In a culture that equates success with comfort, Islam reframes it as faithfulness. Allah says in Surah Al-Mu'minun that the successful are those whose hearts are humble in prayer. Stress humbles the heart in ways ease never could. It strips away arrogance and replaces it with quiet sincerity. You begin to measure success not by what you own, but by how closely you walk with Allah through difficulty. Sometimes stress arrives through people, through relationships that test your patience and restraint. Allah acknowledges this reality in Surah At-Taghabun, warning that among spouses and children can be a trial. This does not mean love is wrong, but that attachment can be heavy. Stress teaches balance, teaching the heart to love without losing itself, to care without replacing Allah as the ultimate source of security. Stress also sharpens gratitude. When relief finally comes, even in small forms, the heart recognizes it as mercy. Allah reminds us in Surah Ibrahim that if we are grateful, He will increase us. Stress prepares the heart to recognize blessings it once overlooked. A calm moment, a deep breath, a sincere smile become gifts rather than expectations. There are stresses that come from uncertainty, from not knowing what lies ahead. Allah addresses this fear in Surah Luqman, reminding us that no soul knows what it will earn tomorrow. Stress pushes the believer to surrender false certainty and replace it with trust. Tawakkul is not knowing the outcome, it is trusting the one who holds it. Stress also deepens humility in dua. When you feel powerless, your supplications become raw and honest. In Surah Anbiya, Yunus calls out from layers of darkness, acknowledging his own wrongdoing and Allah's perfection. That dua, born in extreme stress, becomes timeless. Stress removes the formality from prayer and replaces it with desperation. and desperation is never ignored by Allah. Allah also allows stress to break cycles of sin. Comfort often feeds heedlessness, but pressure awakens conscience. In Surah Sajda, Allah mentions tasting people with lesser punishments before the greater one, so that they may return. Stress can be a wake-up call, a merciful interruption before greater harm. It redirects the soul while there is still time. Stress can also be collective, felt by entire communities. The Quran recounts moments when believers felt shaken to their core. In Surah Al-Ahzab, the believers were tested intensely, surrounded by enemies, hearts reaching throats. Yet Allah describes that moment as one that distinguished the truthful from the hypocrites. Stress reveals alignment. It clarifies where hearts truly stand. There are stresses that come from internal battles, from wrestling with thoughts, fears, and regrets. Allah addresses the nafs repeatedly, reminding us in Surah Ash-Shams that success belongs to Thuth, one who purifies it. Stress exposes what lies beneath the surface. It reveals unresolved wounds and neglected spiritual needs. In that exposure is the opportunity for healing. Stress also teaches mercy toward yourself. Islam does not demand perfection. Allah says in Surah An-Nisa that He wants to lighten your burden, for the human being was created weak. Stress is not proof of failure. It is evidence of humanity. Allah's expectations are not crushing, they are compassionate. He opens doors of forgiveness wider when you stumble under pressure. There are moments when stress brings silence, when answers do not come quickly. Allah reassures the believer in Surah Ad-Duha that silence does not mean abandonment. Delay is not rejection. Stress stretches hope until it matures. It teaches you to wait with dignity rather than demand with entitlement. Stress also aligns you with the oppressed and broken-hearted. Allah says in a sacred narration that He is with those whose hearts are broken for His sake. Stress cracks the heart open so divine closeness can enter. A heart that is never broken has never fully known reliance. Even physical stress and exhaustion are acknowledged. In Surah Al-Qasas, Musa helps others despite his own fatigue, then turns to Allah admitting his need. Stress does not disqualify you from goodness. It often accompanies it. Carrying weight does not mean you are off track. It may mean you are trusted with more. Stress also reminds the believer that outcomes are not their responsibility. Effort is. Allah says in Surah Ali Imran that matters belong to Him alone. Stress comes when you confuse effort with control. Letting go does not mean giving up. It means placing the result where it belongs. There are stresses that teach restraint when anger rises and words press against the tongue. Allah praises those who restrain anger and pardon others in Surah Ali Imran. Stress gives the believer a chance to practice moral strength, to respond rather than react, to choose character over impulse. Stress also redefines courage. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is movement despite it. Allah describes the believers in Surah Al-Fath as firm against opposition yet compassionate among themselves. Stress forges that balance, creating hearts that are strong without becoming harsh. Through every layer of stress, Allah remains closer than the struggle itself. He tells us in Surah Qaf that He is nearer to us than our jugular vein. Stress may feel isolating, but it is never lonely. The one who allowed it is fully aware of its weight, its timing, and its purpose, and every step taken under that weight is seen, recorded, and honored.